In early 2025, the world of international aid wasn't just shaken, it was shattered. We're talking about decades of work, billions of dollars, life-saving programs, all brought to a sudden, screeching halt. Today, we're digging into the shutdown of USAID and the global shockwave it sent across the planet.
All right, let's just start with the most staggering number in this whole story, 90%. Almost overnight, 90% of all projects run by the U.S. Agency for International Development, America's main foreign aid organization, were just gone. This wasn't a slow phase-out. This was like driving full speed and hitting a brick wall. So, to really get the scale of this catastrophe, we first have to ask, what exactly was USAID? Because for more than 60 years, it was one of the single most powerful forces in the entire world.
What's really fascinating is how it changed over the decades. It was literally born out of the Cold War, created by JFK as a tool of American diplomacy. But by the 90s, its mission had become laser-focused on global health, taking on giants like polio. And then, through the massive PEPFAR program, it became a key fighter against HIV/AIDS. By 2024, its goal was just enormous, to end extreme poverty and help build democracies.
And boy, did it have the money to back that up. In 2024 alone, we're talking about a budget of over $35 billion. That money went to 130 countries, and get this, the UN said it accounted for 42% of all humanitarian aid on the entire planet. It wasn't just a big player, it was the player.
So how does a 60-year-old institution that massive just come crashing down? We've seen what it was, now let's look at the exact moment it all stopped.
The key here is the sheer speed. On January 20th, 2025, a single executive order was signed. It didn't just slash the budget for the future, it immediately canceled $60 billion in existing contracts. Thousands of programs, many of them in the middle of crucial work, were just grounded, overnight.
And this quote from an aid worker who was there, it just says it all. This wasn't a policy change, it was a cataclysm, an earthquake that left decades of work and vital life-saving programs completely in ruins.
So what does an earthquake like that actually look like for the millions of people who depended on that aid? Let's break down the absolutely devastating human cost.
To really feel the impact, you have to see just how woven into the fabric of the world USAID was. Look at this. Right before the shutdown, it was spending almost $10 billion on humanitarian aid, another $9.5 billion on health, nearly $7 billion on governance. When that funding just evaporated, it left these massive, gaping holes everywhere.
And the first and most immediate hole was in global health. The numbers here are just chilling. Projections showed over 176,000 preventable deaths from HIV alone, tens of thousands more from tuberculosis. Anti-malaria programs that protected over 50 million people just stopped. This wasn't some distant threat. People's access to life-saving medicine was cut off in an instant.
But the damage didn't stop at the clinics. It created this horrible domino effect. In education, teacher training programs just collapsed. In economics, job creation initiatives vanished into thin air. In governance, efforts to fight corruption in over 100 countries disappeared. And for humanitarian crises, the supply chains keeping refugee camps running were severed, putting tens of thousands of the world's most vulnerable people at immediate risk.
But, in the middle of all this chaos, a different story started to take shape. This crisis forced a desperate scramble for solutions, sure, but it also became a brutal, unavoidable wake-up call.
Instead of just collapsing, leaders started to organize. The Africa CDC, for instance, put together a really smart three-part plan. First, push their own nations to finally fund their own healthcare. Second, get creative and find new money from private companies and citizens living abroad. And third, and this is probably the most important one, start building local factories to make their own health supplies, to become self-sufficient.
And this quote from Salim Abdul Karim in South Africa just nails the new mindset. The shock of the shutdown forced this painful but totally necessary conversation about the dangers of relying on other countries for the basics. The goal suddenly shifted from just finding a new donor to ending the need for one in the first place.
So what this all reveals is that the shutdown of USAID wasn't just a humanitarian disaster. No, it was way bigger. It actually triggered a fundamental rethinking of foreign aid itself, and it's reshaping the entire global power structure as we speak.
To really wrap your head around this shift, it helps to know about an old academic idea called dependency theory. Now, put simply, it argues that foreign aid isn't always just a simple gift. It can actually create a relationship where poorer nations become permanently dependent on wealthy ones, which can end up hurting their own ability to develop in the long run. So the theory basically splits the world into two camps. You've got the powerful core nations giving the aid and the peripheral nations receiving it. For decades, that was just how things worked. But the USAID's shutdown has become this massive, real-world test of that whole idea, forcing those peripheral nations to do exactly what proponents of the theory always wanted, to become self-reliant.
And a move like that creates a huge geopolitical vacuum. A lot of America's global influence, its soft power, came directly from USAID programs. With that gone, who fills the void? Well, a lot of experts are pointing straight at China and its Belt and Road Initiative, which builds influence through giant infrastructure loans. The big fear is that as American influence fades, China's, with a very different way of doing things, is going to rush right in to fill that gap. Which leaves us with this final, massive question. The collapse of USAID is, without a doubt, a tragedy for millions of people. But a decade from now, will we look back on this as the moment American global leadership began to fade? Or will it be remembered as the painful birth of a new era, one where developing nations finally broke that cycle of dependency and started forging their own path forward? The honest answer is, we just don't know yet.